Shortly after my wife and I moved to Polson 21 years ago, we started shopping for a boat, which was a logical thing to do now that we were living near Flathead Lake. Before we bought our boat, we sought the advice of friends here and followed their suggestions to be sure we got one that was big enough to handle the kind of storms that come up on the lake. The first weekend we had our boat, we had gone to Big Fork, and coming back, we were going into waves that were 3 to 4 feet high. Even taking it slow, the spray was coming over the front of the boat, but other than getting a little wet, from the spray, our boat handled the waves very nicely. All of us have been in storms at some time: windstorms, rain, blizzards, hail, perhaps even a tornado or hurricane. There are also other kinds of storms that can feel too big for us to handle, including illness, financial losses, relationship problems, and more. Mark 4:35 to 40 tells of a time Jesus' disciples were in a physical storm, which was also a crisis of faith for them. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Now, that sounds like a silly question to us who are sitting in this beautiful church on dry land, but their fears were real and understandable considering the storm they were in. The Gospels are clear that Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishermen, so at least those 4 disciples would have been familiar with boats, the Sea of Galilee, and storms at sea. We can be sure that the disciples had been doing everything they could to keep the boat from sinking, but the water was coming in faster than they could bail it out, and they became afraid that the storm would take their lives. Why was Jesus sleeping during the storm? I think there are at least 2 answers. One, he trusted the disciples to do what was necessary to get them to the other side, and perhaps more importantly, he knew he was safe in God's hands no matter what was happening around him. The disciples seem to have lacked that assurance because they woke Jesus and asked him, "Don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples had trusted their boat and their experience and strength to bring them to safety. What do you rely on to carry you through the storms of life? How would you describe your boat? I'm not asking how big it is, whether it's aluminum or fiberglass, or how big your motor is. I'm asking, what do you rely on to get you through the storms of life? Do you trust in your own strength and ability to handle whatever comes along? Do you trust in your financial resources or the experts, doctors, and accountants around you to get you through? If your answer is something like that, I'm concerned for you. But if you say that you look to your faith in God, I am more confident that you will be able to weather any storm that comes along. Isaiah 43:1 has 5 very good reasons to choose faith in God as your boat. 1, God created you. Choosing faith in God is choosing to trust the one who created everything that is. 2, God formed you. God did not just create human beings and then left us alone to make babies. He intentionally and personally formed you as a unique individual according to his plan just for you. 3, God has redeemed you. In spite of all your mistakes and shortcomings, he has made it possible for you to enjoy a relationship with him in this life and then spend eternity with him in paradise. 4, God has summoned you by name. He didn't just call, "Hey, you." He doesn't call you as part of the human race saying, "All you people, come here." He knows you and personally calls you by name. 5, God says that you are his. He loves you so much that he claims us as his beloved daughters and sons. The promises of Isaiah 43:2 give more excellent reasons to choose God to be the boat to carry you through life. It says, "When you pass through waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." He didn't promise a life without trouble. Instead, he promised to be with us, carrying us safely through whatever the storms of life might bring. Matthew 14:22 through 33 tells us more about faith overcoming a storm. Jesus had sent the disciples ahead in the boat. Through the night, they struggled to make headway because of the strong winds and waves. In the pre-dawn twilight, they saw Jesus walking on the water toward them, and they were terrified, thinking he was a ghost. But immediately Jesus said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. Question: was the water suddenly calm and then Peter got out of the boat? No. The storm was continuing. But because Jesus called Peter to come, he was able to get out of the boat and walk on the water. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. Notice it says that when Peter cried out to the Lord, immediately Jesus reached out and caught him. And when they climbed into the boat, then the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." At that moment, they were no longer just trusting in a boat made of wood. They had gotten on board the vessel of faith in Jesus. Have you sometimes been like the disciples and wondered if Jesus cared, that a storm you were in was about to overwhelm you? I've been through many storms in the past, and I admit there were times when I have felt that I was sinking and about to go under. During those times, I have been so overwhelmed by the impact of what I was going through that it was all I could see. But then, when I reached out to Jesus, he calmed the storm going on inside me. The situation around me may not have changed right away, but when my thoughts were on him, I no longer felt so overwhelmed. Psalm 107, verses 4 through 7 tells of some people who came to the point of feeling helpless, and then they turned to God. It says, "Some wandered in the desert wastelands, finding no way to a city where they could settle. They were hungry and thirsty, and their lives ebbed away. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight way to a city where they could settle." The section of Isaiah 43 that we talked about earlier is evidence that God knows we will experience trouble in our lives, and that he will be with us to help. James 1, 2 through 4 contains advice that lifts up the positive results that can be produced when we go through difficult times trusting in the Lord. It says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Verses 6 through 8 contain further advice concerning how a person turns to the Lord for help. It says, "But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind." That's kind of like Peter walking on the water, then taking his eyes off Jesus. It continues, "That man should not think he will receive anything from the Lord. He is double-minded, unstable in all he does." In facing the storms of life, we also have this promise from Jesus in John 14:12. "I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. So far, unless it has been frozen, I haven't had the faith to actually walk on water. But Jesus has saved me in many storms in my life, which, for a time, felt like they were going to overwhelm me. He may not ask me to physically walk on water in the days ahead, but because of my past experience with him, I know he will always be there to keep me from sinking when the storms of life come. Amen.